Back in 1944, Britain ruled the world. The British pound was the king of all currencies. British bankers sat in their fancy offices and laughed at anyone who said it could ever fall. They controlled the largest empire in human history. How could their money ever become worthless? But here's what actually happened. Just 32 years later, in 1976, Britain was completely broke. So broke that they had to go begging to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. Their currency, which had once been backed by a quarter of the entire planet, became nothing more than worthless paper. The mighty had fallen, and it happened shockingly fast. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Before Britain, it was the Dutch guilder that ruled the world. Before the Dutch, it was the Portuguese real. Before Portugal, the Spanish peso. Every single one of these currencies dominated global trade. Every single one seemed invincible. And every single one collapsed following the exact same pattern. 7 stages, like clockwork, over and over again throughout history. And right now, as I'm talking to you, the US dollar just entered stage 6 of that same pattern. If you understand what happened to those empires and their money, you'll understand exactly what's coming for America. More importantly, you'll know what you need to do to protect yourself and your family. People say history doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. And when it comes to reserve currencies, the rhyme is so precise it's almost scary. There's a billionaire investor named Ray Dalio. You might have heard of him. He's the guy who predicted the 2008 financial crash when everyone else thought everything was fine. He spent decades studying this exact pattern. He analyzed 500 years of economic data, looking at every major empire, every reserve currency, and every collapse. What he discovered is absolutely mind-blowing. There are 7 stages that every reserve currency goes through. All 7 stages every single time, with no exceptions. The Dutch guilder lasted about 80 years as the world's reserve currency. The British pound lasted roughly 100 years. The US dollar? We're currently in year 80 since something called Bretton Woods in 1944. The pattern is so reliable that Dalio used it to make billions of dollars betting against markets when everyone else thought things were perfectly fine. In 2008, while Lehman Brothers collapsed and Wall Street was burning to the ground, Dalio's fund was actually up 14%. How is that possible? Because he saw the pattern that everyone else missed, and that exact same pattern is screaming at us right now, louder than ever before. Let me walk you through these 7 stages. As I explain each one, I want you to think about where America is today. Because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. It'll change how you think about money forever. Stage 1 is always the same. Every reserve currency is born from conflict and war. After a massive war, there's always one clear winner. One nation that comes out stronger than everyone else combined. For Portugal back in the 1400s, it was their dominance of the seas after pushing back their enemies. For Spain, it was conquering the Americas and all that gold. For the Dutch, it was defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. For Britain, it was winning the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. And for America, World War II. By 1944, the United States held 2/3 of all the gold in the entire world. Every other major power was completely destroyed. Europe was literally rubble. Japan was reduced to ashes. China was broken and torn apart by civil war. America stood alone as the undisputed superpower. At a conference in Bretton Woods in 1944, 44 nations got together and agreed that the US dollar would become the world's reserve currency. Every other currency would be tied to the dollar, and the dollar would be backed by gold at $35 per ounce. This is always how it starts. Military victory creates economic dominance, and stage 1 begins. Stage 2 is the golden age. After the war, nobody wants to fight anymore. The winning power builds a global order based on its rules. Trade expands across the world. Innovation explodes. Living standards go through the roof. For America, this was 1945 to 1965, the greatest economic boom in human history. This is when the American middle class was actually created. A regular factory worker could buy a house, support an entire family on one income, and retire with a solid pension. The American dream wasn't just a dream. It was everyday reality for millions of people. But here's what most people completely miss. This prosperity actually creates the seeds of its own destruction. Because during stage 2, everyone starts borrowing money. Governments borrow, corporations borrow, regular citizens borrow. Why? Because times are good, interest rates are low, the future looks incredibly bright. The reserve currency country especially borrows because it has what economists call exorbitant privilege. Other countries need dollars to trade with each other, so they're willing to lend to America at super cheap rates. It's like having the world's credit card with basically no limit. And boy, did America use it. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. was spending absolutely massive amounts on the Vietnam War and President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. The debt was growing bigger and bigger, but nobody really cared because we were America. The dollar was king. Stage 3 is where things get dangerous. The debt keeps growing, but something fundamental changes. The debt starts growing faster than the income needed to pay it back. For America, this happened in the late 1960s. Other countries started noticing something was seriously wrong. France's President Charles de Gaulle got suspicious. He did the math and realized America was printing way more dollars than it actually had gold to back them up. So in 1965, de Gaulle did something brilliant and devastating. He started exchanging his dollars for actual gold. He literally sent French naval ships to New York Harbor to physically pick up France's gold from Fort Knox and take it back home. Other countries watched this and started doing the exact same thing. By 1971, America's gold reserves were absolutely hemorrhaging. President Nixon faced an impossible choice. Either let all of America's gold flow out to foreign countries, or break the promise. On August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced that America would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The Bretton Woods system was dead. The dollar was no longer backed by anything except the full faith and credit of the United States government. This is stage 3. This is when the currency becomes what's called pure fiat money, backed by nothing but trust and promises. Stage 4 is when the printing press goes crazy. Without gold backing, there's literally no limit to how much money a government can print. And print they did. The 1970s saw absolutely massive inflation. Oil prices quadrupled almost overnight. Gold prices went from $35 an ounce all the way to $850 an ounce. The dollar lost 65% of its purchasing power in just a single decade. Imagine that. In 10 years, your money became worth only 1/3 of what it used to buy. But here's what's crucial to understand. America actually survived stage 4. How? One man, Paul Volcker. In 1979, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker did something that seemed completely insane. He raised interest rates to 20%. 20%. He deliberately crashed the economy to kill inflation. Unemployment hit 10%. Businesses failed left and right. It was absolutely brutal, but it worked. By 1985, inflation was dead. The dollar strengthened again. America entered a second golden age. Stage 5 looked like a comeback. The 1990s tech boom happened. The Cold War ended. America got what they called a peace dividend. For 30 years, from 1980 to 2008, America looked absolutely invincible again. The Soviet Union collapsed. China opened up to trade with the West. Globalization meant American companies dominated the entire world. The dollar was stronger than ever before. Everyone thought we'd learned our lesson, but here's the thing. The debt never stopped growing. It grew under Reagan. It grew under Clinton. It grew under Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. Every single president, regardless of party, kept adding to it. And after 2008, something changed forever. The 2008 financial crisis should have been a massive wake-up call. Instead, it became an excuse to do the unthinkable. Print money on a scale never before seen in human history. The Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion between 2008 and 2014. They gave it a fancy name. They called it quantitative easing. But let's be completely honest about what it actually was: creating money out of thin air to buy government debt. Then COVID hit, and the printing went into absolute hyperdrive. In 2020 and 2021 alone, the U.S. created 40% of all dollars that have ever existed in history. Think about that. 40% of all dollars ever created in just 2 years. Today, the U.S. national debt is $38 trillion, not billion, trillion. That's $100,000 for every single man, woman, and child in America. But here's the really scary part that nobody talks about. The interest payment on that debt is now over $1 trillion per year. That's more than we spend on our entire military. That's more than we spend on Medicare. We're now borrowing money just to pay the interest on the money we already borrowed. Read that again. We're taking out new credit cards to make the minimum payment on our old credit cards. This is stage 5. This is where the math literally stops working. Stage 6 is the exodus, and it's happening right now. Foreign countries are starting to ask a very simple question. Why are we lending money to America at 4% interest when inflation is eating away 3% of that? We're losing money in real terms, and slowly, quietly, they're starting to walk away. For the first time in 80 years, central banks around the world are net sellers of US Treasury bonds. They're getting rid of them. China has reduced its holdings by over $300 billion in just the past 3 years. Japan is selling. Saudi Arabia is selling. Even more telling, they're buying gold instead. Lots and lots of gold. In 2023 alone, central banks bought more gold than any single year since 1950. Why? Because they see what's coming. Ray Dalio said it explicitly in October 2024. We are facing very, very dark times. He warned that the U.S. is in the late stages of a debt cycle that typically ends in one of two ways, either default or devaluation. Default means not paying the debt back. That's basically impossible for America. It would end the dollar's reserve status overnight and cause global chaos. So that leaves devaluation, printing more and more money, inflation, the slow, painful destruction of the dollar's purchasing power. And here's what nobody is telling you on the news. This is exactly, and I mean exactly, what happened to Britain. In 1945, Britain was still considered a superpower. The pound was still a reserve currency. But Britain was completely broke from World War II, so they borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, just like we're doing now. By 1967, they had to devalue the pound by 14% overnight. People's savings just got cut by 14% with a single announcement. By 1976, Britain went to the IMF begging for a bailout. The conditions were absolutely humiliating. Britain had to cut government spending, raise taxes, and accept that the pound was finished as a reserve currency. The entire transition from Britain rules the world to Britain is broke took just 31 years, from 1945 to 1976. America entered stage 6 around 2020. If the pattern holds, and it always has, we have somewhere between 5 to 10 years before stage 7 hits. Stage 7 is the collapse. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Stage 7 doesn't mean America disappears off the map. Britain didn't disappear. The Dutch didn't disappear. Spain and Portugal still exist today. but their currencies died as reserve currencies, and when that happens, the standard of living absolutely collapses. In Britain's case, by the early 1980s, unemployment was over 10%. Inflation hit 20%. The average British citizen lost half their purchasing power in just 1 decade. The British Empire, which had once controlled a quarter of the world's land and population, became just another mid-tier European power. For America, Stage 7 will look different but eerily familiar. The dollar won't disappear from existence, but it will lose its reserve status. That means other countries won't need to hold dollars anymore, which means the trillions upon trillions of dollars currently held overseas will come flooding back home like a tsunami. More dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services means one thing: inflation. Massive, life-changing inflation. Your savings, denominated in dollars, will lose value. Your salary, paid in dollars, will buy less and less. Everything priced in dollars, which is literally everything in America, will get more and more expensive. This is exactly what happened in Britain. This is what happened to every reserve currency in history, without exception. And unless something absolutely dramatic changes, this is what will happen to America. So what do you do about it? First, understand that this isn't about being negative or pessimistic. This is about being realistic and prepared. The people who saw Britain's decline coming were able to protect their wealth. The people who didn't, who kept saying it can't happen here, lost absolutely everything. Ray Dalio has been very public about his personal strategy. He's moved heavily into gold. He's diversified into assets outside the dollar. He's buying inflation-protected securities. Why would a billionaire who can afford the best advisors in the world do this? Because he sees Stage 6 turning into Stage 7 right before his eyes. Here's what history teaches us over and over again. In every single reserve currency collapse, hard assets survive and thrive. Gold, real estate, productive businesses, commodities. These things hold their value because they're real and tangible. They can't be printed out of thin air by a government. The people who held cash got absolutely destroyed. In Britain's inflation of the 1970s, if you just held pounds in a savings account, you lost 75% of your purchasing power. But if you held gold, you multiplied your wealth by 10 times. In Weimar Germany in the 1920s, people who held German marks lost literally everything. Their life savings became worthless. But people who owned farmland, factories, and gold, they became the new wealthy class. The pattern is always the same throughout history. During a currency collapse, wealth doesn't actually disappear into thin air. It just transfers. It transfers from people holding the dying currency to people holding real, tangible assets. Second, understand the timing of all this. We're at Stage 6 right now today. As you're watching this, that means we likely have somewhere between 5 to 10 years before Stage 7 really hits hard. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things, but it's enough time to prepare yourself. The absolute worst thing you can do is nothing. Just pretending this isn't happening and hoping it goes away. The second worst thing you can do is panic. Selling everything tomorrow and buying gold bars to bury in your backyard. The best thing you can do is understand this pattern clearly and position yourself accordingly over time. This doesn't mean you need to sell everything and buy gold bars tomorrow morning. It means you need to start thinking seriously about how to protect your wealth and your family's future in a world where the dollar is no longer king. Start educating yourself. Start diversifying. Start preparing. I started this video by telling you about Britain in 1944. They genuinely thought their empire would last forever. Their currency had been dominant for 100 years. Surely it would last another 100, right? Wrong. In just 32 years, it was completely over. The exact same thing happened to the Dutch before them. The exact same thing happened to the Portuguese. The exact same thing happened to the Spanish. This isn't a question of if it will happen. It's a question of when it will happen. And all the data we can see right now, the debt numbers, the deficits, the foreign countries selling our bonds, the gold buying, all of it is absolutely screaming that we're deep into stage 6. The people who understand this pattern and take it seriously will be able to protect their wealth and even grow it. The people who ignore it, who say, that could never happen to America, will be left wondering what the hell happened when it's too late to do anything about it. Ray Dalio has been studying this exact pattern for 50 years of his life. He's made billions of dollars betting on this pattern being correct. And he's telling us right now, in plain English that anyone can understand, that very, very dark times are ahead. You have a choice right now. You can choose to listen and prepare, or you can choose to ignore it and hope for the best. History shows us very clearly what happens either way. The 7-stage cycle has played out dozens of times over the past 500 years. Every reserve currency has followed the exact same path, every single one, and the US dollar is not going to be the exception. We're at stage 6 right now. Stage 7 is coming, whether we like it or not. The only real question left is this: will you be ready when it arrives?